Diddy crouched beside a little girl outside Buckingham Palace, laughing, smiling, signing her sketchbook. But when he leaned in and whispered something to her, the royal guard overheard it. And in that instant, his eyes widened. He stepped down from his post, broke every rule, walked straight toward a global celebrity. But why? What could Diddy possibly have said that made a Queen's Guard abandon centuries of protocol? Before we find out, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Now let's get into it. London was showing off that October morning, sharp, bright cold that made Buckingham Palace look carved from crystal. By 10:30, the forecourt was packed. Tour groups clutching maps, families juggling cameras, kids pressing against the ceremonial ropes. Staff Sergeant Rhys Calloway stood at his post near the South Arch, perfectly still. 43 years old, Coldstream Guards, 22 years of service, written in the lines around his pale blue eyes. To tourists snapping photos, he was just scenery, as permanent and silent as the palace gates. But Rhys Calloway was never just scenery. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw caught morning light, a souvenir from Kandahar province, where he'd learned that survival came down to noticing what everyone else missed. The same instincts that had kept him alive in Afghanistan were very much awake behind those steady blue eyes. His gaze swept the crowd in practiced patterns. The teenager filming the same spot repeatedly. The man whose backpack bulged wrong. The woman checking her phone every 30 seconds. 22 years of training had taught him that danger doesn't always wear camouflage. Sometimes it arrives in designer suits with million-dollar smiles. The convoy rolled up in gleaming black Range Rovers, led by police escort. The crowd's energy shifted like air before a thunderstorm. Phones materialized. Voices rose from chatter to screams. "Oh my God, that's actually him!" Sean Diddy Combs stepped onto the forecourt like he owned it. Custom Armani suit, diamond watch. That practiced smile, perfected through decades of red carpets. The crowd lost their minds. Teenage girls screamed. Adults pushed against barriers. Children chanted Diddy just because everyone else did. Rhys watched with sniper focus. Palace protocol officers confirmed pre-approved walkabout privileges. All legitimate, great publicity for everyone. Diddy worked the crowd like a seasoned politician. He orchestrated photos, cracked jokes, signed whatever was thrust at him. He tousled a boy's hair, posed with an Ohio family, kissed an elderly woman's hand until she nearly fainted. To everyone watching, he was magnetic, charming, a superstar, graciously sharing time with ordinary people. But Rhys had learned to look past surface charm. In Kandahar, the most dangerous men smiled first. The first warning sign was subtle. Diddy crouched for a photo with two young girls, normal enough. But Rhys noticed how his hand rested too low on one girl's back, lingering longer than necessary. The girl's smile flickered as she shifted uncomfortably. Could have been nothing. But Rhys kept watching. Then a young boy offered Diddy a toy soldier. Diddy laughed, ruffled the kid's hair, then leaned down and whispered something that made the child blink in surprise and nod with an awkward grin. The boy's parents stood 3 feet away, beaming and snapping photos, oblivious to whatever had been whispered. Again, nothing you could prove. But instinct doesn't work on evidence. It works on patterns. That familiar tightness settled in Rhys's chest. The same feeling from Kabul when local children started avoiding certain streets. His subconscious picking up signals his mind hadn't processed yet. Something here is wrong. A teenage girl asked for a selfie. Diddy made her laugh, but when she stepped away, Rhys caught something else in his expression. The way his eyes followed her. Not polite interest. Something hungrier. Then their eyes met across the forecourt. Deliberate. a moment of assessment between two men who understood what the other was doing. Diddy's public smile never wavered, but underneath something colder flickered, a half-second micro-expression that said, "I see you watching me, and I don't care." Rhys stared back, his mind racing. In that brief exchange, Sean Combs had revealed himself, not as the charming celebrity, but as something else entirely, something that recognized a threat and dismissed it as irrelevant. The moment stretched between them like a wire under tension. Then Diddy turned away, throwing his arm around another fan like nothing had happened. But Rhys Calloway had spent 2 decades reading dangerous men in dangerous places. And Sean Combs had just told him everything he needed to know without saying a word. The crowd buzzed, still pressing forward, drunk on celebrity proximity. Palace staff hovered nearby. None seemed concerned. This was just good publicity. That's what made it so dangerous. Evil rarely announces itself with sirens. It hides behind smiles and the assumption that famous people are trustworthy. Rhys shifted his weight slightly. To tourists, he looked the same as before. But now he was alert differently. Not just ceremonially vigilant, operationally aware. Because he could feel it building, that electric tension that comes right before everything goes sideways. He just didn't know how bad it was about to get. That's when little Miri appeared at the edge of the crowd. She couldn't have been older than 9. Brown hair in 2 neat braids, tied with bright pink ribbons, wearing a red jumper with a cartoon character he didn't recognize. She clutched a spiral sketchbook against her chest, like it contained state secrets, her dark eyes wide, with the kind of wonder only children can manage. Her parents had stepped away moments before, drawn into animated conversation with a palace guide near the souvenir stand. They were maybe 20 feet away, close enough to keep visual contact, but far enough that they couldn't hear individual conversations over the crowd noise. Diddy spotted Miri immediately, the way predators always spot isolated prey. "Well, look what we have here," he said, that practiced smile spreading across his face as he knelt to her eye level. His voice took on that special register adults use with children, slightly higher, more musical, designed to put them at ease. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Miri's face lit up like Christmas morning. "I'm Miri! I drew you pictures!" She held out her sketchbook with both small hands practically vibrating with excitement. Diddy accepted the book with theatrical reverence, flipping through pages covered in coloured pencils and glitter glue. Music notes scattered across construction paper. A crude but enthusiastic drawing of what might have been the palace. His name spelled out in bubble letters with pink hearts dotting the eyes. "You made all this for me?" His voice carried perfect surprise and appreciation, hitting exactly the right notes to make a child feel special. "This is incredible artwork, Miri, absolutely incredible." She nodded so hard, her braids bounced against her shoulders. "Best drawings I've seen all week," he continued, pulling her in for a quick hug that cameras immediately captured. "You're going to be famous someday, I can tell." The crowd around them melted with collective awes. Someone's grandmother probably teared up. A perfect moment of celebrity kindness that would be remembered and retold for years to come. From his post, Rhys watched the interaction unfold with laser focus. The hug was brief, appropriate by any reasonable standard. Nothing that would raise parental eyebrows or concern palace security. But then Diddy didn't fully release her. He kept one hand resting on her small shoulder while crouching beside her, leaning in to whisper something that made her giggle and cover her mouth with her free hand. They posed for a selfie together, Diddy angling his phone to capture them both in perfect lighting. "Say, superstar," he told her. "Superstar," she chirped, her missing front tooth creating an adorable lisp. Her parents were still distracted, 20 feet away, still deep in conversation about tour schedules and lunch reservations. Nobody nearby thought anything was unusual, just a sweet interaction between a global icon and his youngest fan. The kind of moment that restored faith in celebrities and gave kids stories to tell at school. But Rhys was watching for different things, not smiles or photo opportunities. He was watching body language, micro-expressions, the spaces between words, the things that happen in the gaps when people think nobody's paying attention. And that's when he saw it happen. Miri took a small step backward, not retreating exactly, but the instinctive way children create distance when something feels different and they're not sure what's changed. Maybe she was getting overwhelmed by all the attention, or maybe some deep survival instinct was telling her to maintain space. Diddy gently placed his hand against her back and guided her closer again. Nothing rough, nothing that would alarm anyone watching. Just enough pressure to keep her positioned where he wanted her, between his body and the crowd, where their conversation couldn't be overheard. "You like parties?" he asked her, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. She nodded eagerly. "I love parties, but Mummy says I can't go to grown-up ones yet." "Well," Diddy said with a conspiratorial wink, "what if I told you about special parties, the kind where only really cool girls get invited?" Miri blinked, processing this concept. What kind of special? His smile widened, but his voice dropped even lower. The kind where you get to wear beautiful dresses and feel like a real princess. Would you like that? She giggled nervously, glancing toward the crowd as if looking for her parents. "That sounds pretty." "It could happen," he told her, his tone becoming more persuasive. "Famous people do things like that all the time. Surprise visits, special trips. But here's the thing." He leaned closer. "It has to be our little secret until it happens. Can you keep secrets, Miri?" That's when every alarm bell in Rhys Calloway's head started screaming at maximum volume. He'd heard this exact script before. Different words, different context, but the same psychological framework, the same pattern human traffickers used to build compliance in children. Start with compliments to make them feel chosen and special. Plant fantasies about exciting adventures and VIP treatment. Introduce the concept of secrets, shared knowledge that creates false intimacy and separates the child from their support system. Diddy wasn't touching her inappropriately, wasn't saying anything explicitly threatening. To anyone listening casually, it would sound like harmless celebrity banter. Maybe a little overgenerous, but nothing more sinister than a famous person getting carried away with his own charm. But Rhys had sat through FBI briefings on child exploitation, had read the case files, had seen the transcripts of how predators groom their victims, building trust through attention and gifts, creating scenarios where children feel uniquely special, gradually normalizing the idea of secret meetings and private time away from parents. This wasn't fame anymore. This was textbook grooming technique, disguised as kindness and filtered through celebrity worship. Miri's expression was shifting. At first she'd worn that soft, flattered look every child gets, when a grown-up compliments their artwork. But now there was something else, a subtle uncertainty creeping in around the edges of her smile. "I don't know if I'm allowed to keep secrets from Mummy and Daddy," she said quietly. "Oh, this isn't a bad secret," Diddy assured her quickly, his voice taking on that coaxing quality that made Rhys's skin crawl. "This is a surprise secret, the good kind, like when you plan someone a birthday party." He guided her another small step toward the rope barrier, positioning himself between her and the nearest palace staffer. His body language remained casual, friendly, but the movement was calculated, creating a bubble of privacy in the middle of a crowd. "Want to know something really special?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper now. She nodded hesitantly, still clutching her sketchbook but holding it tighter. "I always remember my real fans," he said, with that practiced wink that had charmed millions. The special ones, like you. And when I come back to London, maybe we could have our own private party, just you and me. Would you like that? Miri didn't answer immediately. Some part of her 9-year-old brain was starting to register that this conversation felt different from what she'd expected when she'd approached her favourite singer. My parents would have to know, she said uncertainly. Eventually, Diddy replied smoothly. But first it would be our secret, our special thing. You'd wear something really pretty, and we'd have much fun together. Rhys watched as Diddy took one more subtle step toward the rope line, Miri following not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know she had a choice. Adults were supposed to be trusted. Famous adults were supposed to be even more trustworthy. One more step would put them past the ceremonial boundary. Beyond the velvet rope that marked the difference between public space under palace security and somewhere else entirely, somewhere less watched, less protected. That's when Staff Sergeant Rhys Calloway made the decision that would define the rest of his career. He moved. Not dramatically, not with the kind of sudden motion that would cause panic or create headlines. But he stepped down from his ceremonial post and walked across the forecourt with the measured pace of a man who had made up his mind about something important. His boots clicked against the ancient cobblestones in a rhythm that somehow cut through all the crowd noise like a knife through silk. Gasps rippled through the tourists like wind through wheat. Phones swung toward him, fingers frantically tapping record buttons. Someone whispered, "The guard's moving," like they'd witnessed a miracle or a catastrophe, which, in the context of palace protocol, they basically had. But Rhys wasn't thinking about regulations or tradition, or the dozen rules he was about to shatter. He wasn't worried about his career, or the disciplinary hearing that would inevitably follow. He was thinking about a 9-year-old girl who was 30 seconds away from being manoeuvred into a situation she wouldn't understand until it was far too late. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice carrying that tone of absolute, unquestionable authority that comes from 2 decades of commanding respect in places where hesitation gets people killed. "The child stays on this side of the rope." Diddy stopped mid-step and turned slowly. That celebrity smile was already forming on his lips, camera-ready, even in the moment of being challenged. But there was something else in his eyes now. A flicker of calculation, annoyance quickly suppressed. "Easy there, soldier," he chuckled, raising both hands in mock surrender, while never losing that practiced charm. "We're just having a conversation here. Little lady's a big fan, and I'm trying to give her a moment she'll remember forever." Miri looked up at Rhys with confusion written across her small face. In her world, adults were supposed to agree with each other, especially when one of them was famous and the other was just doing his job. "He was being really nice," she said quietly, her voice carrying that defensive tone children use when they think someone is being unfair to their new friend. "He likes my drawings." Rhys's voice softened when he addressed her, but his eyes never left Diddy's face. "I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Your drawings are brilliant, but you need to stay where your mum and dad can see you clearly." "Come on, man," Diddy said, with that practiced laugh that had charmed talk show hosts and awards ceremony audiences for decades. "Don't make this into something weird. I'm just being nice to a young fan. What's the harm in a little kindness?" The crowd was murmuring now, uncertain whether they were witnessing a security incident or just an overzealous guard having a bad day. Palace staff had started moving in their direction, a protocol officer walking over with quick, nervous steps, clearly trying to figure out how to handle a situation that wasn't covered in any manual. "Sir," Rhys replied evenly, his tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "the child remains in the public viewing area. She is not to be moved further from her parents." "Moved?" Diddy's eyebrows rose in theatrical confusion. "Nobody's moving anybody. We're just talking about art and music, right, Miri?" But something had shifted in the child's expression. The excitement was still there, but now it was mixed with uncertainty, She could feel the tension in the air, even if she didn't understand its source. "I should probably go back to Mummy and Daddy," she said quietly. "Of course you should," Rhys said immediately. "They're right over there waiting for you." Diddy's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, the mask slipped enough to reveal something colder underneath. Not anger exactly, more like frustration at having a game interrupted by someone who wasn't supposed to be a player. "Well," he said, straightening up to his full height, "some people take their jobs very seriously." The protocol officer had reached them now, flanked by a civilian security supervisor. Both men looked uncomfortable, trying to navigate between respecting a celebrity guest and supporting their own personnel. "Sergeant Calloway," the officer said carefully, "is there a security concern we should be aware of?" "Just ensuring proper protocols are followed, sir," Rhys replied without breaking eye contact with Diddy. The answer was diplomatically perfect. It said everything and nothing, gave the officer room to make his own judgments without forcing anyone into corners they couldn't get out of gracefully. Diddy glanced between Rhys and the officials, clearly calculating his next move. The crowd was fully focused on the drama now, phones recording every second. This wasn't the kind of publicity anyone wanted. "No harm, no foul," he said finally, that megawatt smile returning full force. "Just got a little carried away, talking to such a talented young artist." He crouched down to Miri's level one last time. "You keep drawing those amazing pictures, okay? And remember what I said about special fans getting special treatment." She nodded uncertainly, clutching her sketchbook against her chest. Diddy stood, gave the crowd a wave that somehow managed to look both gracious and slightly martyred, then walked toward his waiting convoy with that confident stride that had carried him across countless red carpets. But just before reaching his Range Rover, he turned back. His eyes found Rhys across the forecourt and held for a moment that stretched longer than casual acknowledgement required. That same cold calculation flickered across his features, not embarrassment, not even anger, just recognition. The look of someone filing away information for future reference. Then the door closed with the soft thunk of expensive engineering, and the convoy pulled away into London traffic. Miri stood frozen for a moment, looking between where Diddy's car had disappeared and the tall guard who had somehow changed everything without raising his voice or moving quickly. "Why did you do that?" she asked Rhys quietly. He couldn't answer while on ceremonial duty, couldn't break protocol any further than he already had without facing serious consequences. But he looked down at her with eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness to ignore warning signs, no matter how subtle. She seemed to understand something in that look, even if she couldn't put it into words yet. The confusion in her face was slowly being replaced by something else. Not fear, but a kind of dawning awareness that maybe, just maybe, something hadn't been quite right about that conversation. Her parents appeared at her side, hurrying over with arms full of palace gift shop bags and faces flushed with excitement. "Miri! Was that really Sean Combs?" her mother gasped. "Did you actually get to meet him?" "We talked about my drawings," Miri said slowly, "and he said some things about parties and secrets." Her father glanced between his daughter and Rhys, picking up on subtle tensions he didn't quite understand. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" "Just grown-up things," she said, then looked up at Rhys again. "But I think maybe they weren't very good things to talk about." Her mother followed her gaze to the guard, who had resumed his ceremonial posture and appeared to be staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. "Well," she said uncertainly, "I'm sure he was just being friendly. Famous people are probably used to talking to lots of different people." But Miri shook her head slowly. "I don't think so, Mummy. I think the guard man was right to make him stop." They guided her away toward the next stop on their tourist itinerary, her small voice fading into the general crowd noise as they discussed lunch plans and afternoon activities. Rhys remained at his post for the rest of his shift, perfectly still and silent as the palace walls themselves. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing unusual had happened at all. Just another day of ceremonial duty in one of the world's most photographed locations. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between perception and reality. Most people would remember that day as the time they witnessed a celebrity appearance at Buckingham Palace. Miri would probably remember it as something more complicated, the day she met her favourite singer and learned that not all adults who smile at you have good intentions. And Rhys Calloway would remember it as the day he stepped forward before something terrible could unfold in plain sight, hidden behind fame and charm, and the dangerous assumption that evil always announces itself with obvious signs. That evening, when his shift ended and the palace gates closed to tourists, Rhys found himself summoned to his commanding officer's quarters. The room was all polished brass and military precision, with a single manila folder sitting unopened on the mahogany desk. Colonel Henderson was a career soldier in his 50s, a man who'd earned his position through decades of difficult decisions rather than political manoeuvring. "Calloway," he began without looking up from the papers scattered before him. "You broke protocol today." "Yes, sir." "Stepped out of position during ceremonial duty, spoke while representing the Crown in a public capacity, intervened in a sanctioned diplomatic engagement without authorization from the chain of command." "Yes, sir." The colonel finally raised his eyes, studying Rhys's face with the attention of someone trying to read between lines that weren't written in any regulation manual. "You understand why we have these protocols, 200 years of tradition. International diplomacy, public perception. We don't make unilateral judgment calls based on personal instincts when we're representing centuries of history in front of cameras from around the world." "Understood, sir." There was a long pause. Not the kind that comes before punishment, but the kind that comes before understanding. The colonel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, weighing words that would never appear in any official report. "That said," he continued, his voice taking on a different quality, "instinct isn't something we train out of good soldiers. It's something we hope they'll know when to trust, even when everything else tells them to stay quiet and follow orders." He closed the folder without opening it, the gesture carrying more weight than any written reprimand could have. "There's no formal report going into your file, no disciplinary action, no career-ending notation. But I need you to understand this kind of creative interpretation of duties can't become a pattern." "Yes, sir." "Dismissed." But as Rhys reached the door, Henderson spoke again. "For what it's worth, Sergeant, I've got 3 daughters of my own. If any of them had been in that little girl's position today, I'd have wanted someone like you watching." That night, alone in his small quarters, Rhys sat on the edge of his narrow bed, polishing his ceremonial boots. His hands moved in familiar circular motions, working the leather to a mirror shine, but his mind was elsewhere. Back at the gates, replaying every second of that interaction. The too familiar touch. The whispered promises about surprise visits and special treatment. The casual introduction of secrets and private meetings. He asked himself the question that had been gnawing at him since Diddy's convoy disappeared into London traffic. What if I was wrong? Maybe he'd embarrassed an innocent child in front of her hero. Maybe he'd damaged a beloved celebrity's reputation over nothing more than his own paranoia and military suspicion. Maybe Sean Combs really had just been trying to make a young fan's day special, and Rhys had turned a magical moment into something awkward and confusing. The doubt sat heavy in his chest as days passed, then weeks, then months. The incident faded from palace memory the way most small disruptions do. There were no follow-up investigations, no media inquiries, no official reviews of protocol. Life continued with the steady rhythm of duty and routine that had defined Rhys's service for over 2 decades. Until one morning in March, 6 months after that autumn day at the palace gates, when everything changed forever. Rhys was in the mess hall, nursing his first coffee of the day and scanning morning briefings on his tablet, when a headline made his blood run cold. Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs arrested on federal trafficking and racketeering charges. The story unfolded in waves over the following days, dozens of victims coming forward. Federal investigations spanning multiple states and years of alleged abuse. Systematic patterns of manipulation, coercion, and exploitation that stretched back decades. One article mentioned documented grooming behaviours exhibited toward minors during public appearances and fan interactions. Behaviour that investigators say followed consistent patterns designed to build trust and normalise inappropriate contact. Another referenced hours of video evidence from fan encounters at various events, smiles and hugs and whispered conversations that had seemed innocent to everyone watching but formed a clear predatory pattern when examined by trained investigators. A third detailed the specific techniques used. Compliments designed to make children feel special and chosen. Promises of exclusive access and VIP treatment. The gradual introduction of secrets and private communications that separated victims from their support systems. Rhys read every word while his coffee grew cold in the cup, sitting alone in the quiet mess hall as rain drummed against windows that looked out onto the same palace grounds where he'd made his choice 6 months earlier. There was no vindication in the headlines. No mention of a royal guard who'd recognised the warning signs months before federal investigators made their arrests. No praise for trusting trained instincts over protocol when every regulation said to stay silent and mind your post. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He closed the browser tab, folded his hands on the scratched mess hall table, and exhaled slowly through his nose. Not relief, exactly. Just the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you did the right thing when it mattered most, even when nobody was watching and nobody would ever know. Somewhere in London, a little girl named Miri was probably getting ready for school, listening to different music now, living the normal childhood that every kid deserves. She might not even remember the strange day when a palace guard interrupted her meeting with a celebrity. But if she did remember, she'd remember going home safe with her parents instead of disappearing into something too horrible for a 9-year-old mind to imagine. And in the end, that was worth more than any commendation or recognition could ever be. Sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields against obvious enemies. Sometimes they happen on crowded city streets, in broad daylight, when one person chooses to step forward while everyone else just watches and assumes everything is fine. Sometimes protecting innocence is as simple as trusting your gut and refusing to stay silent when every fibre of your being is screaming that something is wrong, even when you can't prove it. Even when it might cost you everything, even when the whole world is telling you to mind your own business. And sometimes the difference between a child going home safely and vanishing into a nightmare comes down to one soldier who remembered that some things, protecting the innocent, trusting trained instincts, acting when action is needed, are always more important than following rules. Would you have noticed the subtle warning signs that day at the palace? The too familiar touches, the whispered promises, the gradual isolation disguised as special attention. Do you think Rhys was right to break centuries of protocol based on instinct alone? Or should he have stayed silent and trusted that surely someone else would have intervened if anything was really wrong? How many times do we see something that makes our skin crawl but stay quiet because we can't prove it, because we don't want to make a scene, because we assume we must be overreacting? If this story opened your eyes to what royal guards really stand for beyond the ceremony and tradition, if it showed you the real people behind those red uniforms who stay watchful even when the whole world thinks they're just tourist attractions, then hit that like button and show some respect for those who guard more than just buildings. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. We bring you powerful Royal Guard stories like this one every single day, showing the dedication and vigilance that goes far beyond what most people ever see or understand. And if someone you know still thinks these guards are just decorative figures standing around for photo opportunities, send them this video. They might never look at a ceremonial soldier the same way again. Check out our other Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen right now. Each one reveals another side of the courage and commitment that most people never realize exists behind those perfectly pressed uniforms. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that just might change the way you see the world.